All right, so are you ready to dive into this? We've got a mountain of executive orders and proclamations from January 20th, 2025.
Wow. Yeah, that first day.
Yeah, someone came in ready to make some changes, huh?
It's a lot to unpack for sure.
We're talking foreign policy, national security, energy, even like renaming landmarks. It's a lot.
Definitely sets a tone, doesn't it?
Yeah, and speaking of tone, did you notice how often they use America first?
Oh, yeah, right off the bat. Like with that America First policy directive,
Huh?
the one for the Secretary of State.
It's basically saying, hey, State Department, everything you do, got to put America first.
It's not just like a suggestion either.
Mm.
That directive really digs in. It's like they want to change how the whole State Department works. Diplomacy, foreign aid, the whole thing.
Okay, so America first, that's a theme. But then there's this declaring a national energy emergency order.
Yeah, that one,
That one's a bit intense.
it doesn't pull any punches.
It says right out that U.S. energy production is inadequate and that it's a threat to national security.
And wow, they're even bringing out the big guns. Like, it mentions using eminent domain and the Defense Production Act to get energy projects moving faster.
Like, remember the 1970s energy crisis, the gas lines and everything?
Oh, yeah.
They're basically saying we're in that kind of situation now.
Wow.
And it gets even more,
Oh, yeah.
it goes after environmental regulations too. It tells those agencies like the EPA to use emergency provisions, in the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act
Oh, so to basically bypass some of the rules.
to speed up energy development, yeah.
Yeah.
Which it's a big change from, all that focus on renewable energy.
Absolutely. I mean, I get the appeal of more energy, especially if it means like cheaper gas and stuff.
Sure.
But there's always a flip side. Like, what about the environment? The air, the water, all that.
Right, and what about climate change? We were just making progress there.
Exactly. This order really seems to put energy needs now ahead of, the long-term environmental stuff. And that affects everyone.
Yeah, that's a big one. Okay, now get ready for this. This next order is, well, it's going to be controversial. It's called Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government.
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
Right. So basically, it says that sex is only biological, like it's fixed, and that all the federal agencies have to work under that definition.
So that's different from how things have been going, right?
Yeah.
With all the, expanding transgender rights and all that.
It's a big step back. Like, if sex is only biological, then a lot of protections for transgender people, they kind of disappear.
Like in healthcare, education, even just using the bathroom.
And this order, it takes aim at funding, too. Anything related to gender ideology, they're going after it. And any policies that let transgender people use facilities that match their gender identity, they want to reverse those.
Yeah, this one's going to be a big one. I can already see the lawsuits piling up. We've seen so many legal fights about transgender rights lately, and this is like throwing gasoline on the fire.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This will be in the courts, probably for years. And it's going to be a big social issue, too, for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, changing gears completely now. Let's talk about the designating cartels and other organizations as foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists order.
Wow, another long one. So what's that about?
Basically, they want to lay those international drug cartels as terrorist groups, like officially.
So like using the same tools we use against, like Al-Qaeda. That's
a big escalation in the war on drugs.
yeah, it's a whole different game. Imagine like the military at the border or even going after cartels in other countries.
It even mentions the Alien Enemies Act. Remember that one?
Oh, that one's got a complicated history.
Yeah, think back to World War II, and they used it to,
Oh, to intern Japanese Americans.
Exactly. It's a powerful law, but it can be misused. So bringing it up here is a really big deal.
Definitely raises some questions. Like, does calling someone a terrorist automatically make them one?
Yeah.
And what about, innocent people getting caught in the crossfire?
Right. And what about our rights here and in those other countries? This could have a global impact.
It's a lot to think about.
Okay, now let's talk tech. With the establishing and implementing the President's Department of Government Efficiency Order.
Government efficiency. That sounds,
Ambitious.
yeah.
So they're creating a whole new department called DOGE.
DOGE. Like
Yeah.
the meme.
Yeah, I know, right? Anyway, their goal is to modernize all the government's technology and software.
Okay, I can see why they'd want to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever tried to use a government website?
It's like going back in time, right?
Totally. So this new department is supposed to bring the government into, like, the 21st century.
That's the idea. But think about how entrenched all those old systems are.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be tough.
So to help, they're also creating Duo GE teams within the existing agencies. It's like their own little tech SWAT teams.
Okay, but realistically, can this actually make the government more efficient?
Right. Or are we just adding more bureaucracy?
It all depends on how much power this DGE department has and if they
Mm,
can actually get anything done.
we'll have to see. Okay, now for the big one. This is what might be the most controversial action of all. The guaranteeing the states protection against invasion proclamation.
Okay, this is the one about the border, right?
Yeah, so they're actually declaring an invasion at the southern border
Okay.
because of all the illegal immigration, and they're using the president's powers to basically stop people from coming in.
Whoa, hold on. That's never been done before.
I know, right? They're using language we usually only use for wars.
And for immigration. Wow.
They're saying that the border situation is such a huge threat that the president can just bypass Congress and do whatever he wants.
So what does that actually mean, like, on the ground?
Well, they're telling the Secretary of Homeland Security to repel, repatriate, or remove anyone involved in this invasion.
That sounds pretty aggressive.
Yeah, it's a very hardline stance.
So legally, can they even do that?
Well, they're basing it on this part of the Constitution, Article 4, Section 4, which says states have to be protected from invasion.
Right, but it's talking about, like, armies, right?
Exactly, but they're saying it applies here, too.
Wow.
So legally, it's going to be challenged for sure. And the consequences, well, we could be talking mass deportations, more military at the border, and basically a whole new way of handling immigration.
Wow. This is going to change the whole debate.
And what about the people who are just trying to, escape bad situations? What about asylum seekers?
Right, what message does this send to them and to the rest of the world?
That's a good question. Okay, last one for this section. Let's talk about the organization of the National Security Council and Subcommittees Memorandum. This one's about restructuring the NSC, the group that advises the president on, all the national security stuff. They want to use a whole of government approach, which sounds pretty comprehensive.
Right, so it's more than just moving people around. It's about how this administration sees threats and how they're going to deal with them.
Mm.
Whole of government means that all the different agencies, like the military, intelligence, the State Department, they all have to work together better.
It's like they're recognizing that threats are more complicated now, and you can't just deal with them in isolation.
Exactly. You need everyone on the same page. And the memo talks about streamlining things too, making decisions faster and coordinating better between agencies.
It's like they're trying to create a more, agile national security system, one that can adapt quickly.
I think that's a good way to put it. It shows how much this administration values efficiency and, well, results.
So we're seeing some big themes here. America first, energy dominance, a strong stance on both gender and immigration, and a streamlined approach to national security. This administration is definitely making its mark, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. They're not afraid to be controversial or to take big steps to get what they want. Love it or hate it, one thing's for sure. Things are about to get interesting.
Yeah, no kidding. Buckle up, everyone, because we're just getting started.
Okay, so what else do they cover in all these orders?
Well, remember that invasion proclamation at the border?
Oh, yeah, right.
Well, there's another order called Protecting the American People Against Invasion. And no surprise, it kind of doubles down on that whole thing, like more border security, even tougher measures.
So even more of a hard line on immigration, huh?
It's like they're trying every trick in the book to stop illegal immigration.
Hmm?
More people, more technology, the whole 9 yards. Okay, then there's protecting the United States from foreign terrorists and other national security and public safety threats.
Okay, and what does that one do?
It's about vetting, like
Yeah.
really intense vetting for anyone trying to come into the U.S.
So everyone, no matter why they're coming.
Yeah, like even tougher background checks, interviews. They're even looking at social media, to make sure nobody dangerous gets in.
So it's going to be a lot harder to get into the U.S. now.
For everyone, yeah, even if they're coming for good reasons, like work or family. Okay, now let's look at reevaluating and realigning United States foreign aid.
Okay, foreign aid. Interesting.
This one puts a 90-day hold on all foreign aid while they figure out if those programs are actually working. and if they fit with current foreign policy goals.
Right, so it's like, are we getting our money's worth?
Exactly. And remember that whole America First thing?
Oh, right, yeah.
This is part of that. They want to make sure that foreign aid is helping America, not just, giving money away. Now let's talk about reforming the federal hiring process and restoring merit to government service.
Okay, so this is about government jobs.
It says they want to focus on skills, efficiency, and, get this, dedication to the Constitution when hiring people.
On the surface, that sounds fine, like get the best people for the job.
Yeah, but see, there's that emphasis on the Constitution. It's almost like they want to make sure everyone working to the government shares their interpretation of it.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about competence, it's about ideology, too.
Exactly. And then there's the memo about restoring accountability for career senior executives.
Senior executives, so like the top-level people.
It's basically saying they answer to the president and they better be carrying out his agenda.
So it's about, like, consolidating power in the executive branch, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. Okay, now for something a little different. Restoring names that honor American greatness. This one's all about, well, names.
Names.
Yeah, so they want to change Mount McKinley back to its original name, Denali.
Oh, okay.
And they want to rename the Gulf of Mexico.
Really?
To what? The Gulf of America.
Wow. That's a statement.
Right. It's all about, like, American pride and dominance,
Yeah.
Okay, now remember that whole push for more domestic energy.
Outright.
Well, this next one is temporary withdrawal of all areas on the outer continental shelf from offshore wind leasing and review of the federal government's leasing and permitting practices for wind projects.
Okay, so basically, no more offshore wind farms.
For now, yeah. While they review everything, they're saying they're worried about the environment, and the impact on things like fishing, but it also lines up with their focus on oil and gas.
Right, those traditional energy sources.
Exactly. Okay, next we have the memo on the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Global Tax Deal.
Global tax deal.
Basically, it says that any international agreements about taxes, they don't mean anything in the U.S. unless Congress says so.
So it's about, like, U.S. sovereignty, making sure we're not bound by global rules we didn't agree to.
Right. It's that America First idea again. And finally, we have unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential.
Alaska, what about it?
They're getting rid of a lot of restrictions on resource development there. So more oil and gas drilling, mining, timber harvesting, all that.
So they're saying it's about jobs, economic growth, and being less dependent on other countries for resources.
Exactly. But of course, there are concerns too, right? Like the environment and the impact on people who live there.
Right, it's a complex issue.
Okay, so that was a lot to do, right? We just went through like a dozen more orders and proclamations. What do you make of all this?
Well, it's pretty clear that this administration isn't messing around. They're using their power, and they have a clear agenda. It's all about security, energy, controlling the border, and really reshaping the government.
So we've gone through a ton of these executive actions, but it's important to remember these aren't just like words on a page, right?
Oh, absolutely. These have real consequences for people, businesses, communities, even globally. It's like trying to predict, I don't know, like every ripple in a pond.
Yeah, impossible to see everything, but we can at least look at the areas that are most likely to be impacted.
Exactly. It's about identifying those key areas.
Like, remember that energy order? We talked
Yeah.
about how it could lead to more energy being produced here, maybe lower prices.
Right, less reliance on foreign oil, all that.
But what about the environmental stuff? Could this actually set us back, like undo all the progress we've made?
That's the big question, isn't it? Remember, the order specifically mentions using those emergency provisions in those environmental laws.
The Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act.
Yeah, those. So that means they could potentially weaken those protections, put the environment at risk.
And it makes you think about the bigger picture, too. This administration, they haven't really been talking about climate change.
Right. It's been pretty quiet on that front.
So how does this focus on, like, oil and gas fit with, trying to reduce emissions and all that?
That's a good question. And it's one that a lot of people are asking. I mean, the long-term effects of this energy policy, they're potentially huge.
Right.
And we need to understand how those are being weighed against the short-term economic benefits. It's a tricky balance.
Really tricky. Okay, now let's go back to that gender ideology order for a second.
Okay, right. The one that
One that's likely to cause a lot of debate.
Yeah, that one.
We talked about how it could really hurt transgender people, make them feel unsafe,
Absolutely. It has the potential to be very damaging.
But thinking more broadly, could it also, like, push us back to more traditional ideas about gender?
It's possible, yeah.
Yeah.
By defining sex as purely biological, it kind of reinforces that old school binary view of gender, you know? Like there are only two options, and that's it.
Male and female, period.
Exactly. And that ignores all the diversity of gender identities and expressions that we're finally starting to recognize and accept.
So could this make society less accepting overall?
It's something to think about.
Yeah?
And we can't forget about the legal challenges that are coming.
Oh, yeah.
This order is going to be fought in court, for sure.
This is going to be a big one for the courts to figure out. Okay, let's talk about the cartels again for a minute.
The ones they want to label as terrorists.
Yeah, that's a bold move, but could it actually make things worse? Like, could it lead to more violence?
It's a valid concern. Calling someone a terrorist doesn't magically solve the problem.
Right. It's not a silver bullet.
In fact, it could even make things worse. Like the cartels could retaliate, become even more violent. And then what happens to the innocent people caught in the middle?
That's a good point. And think about the bigger picture, too.
Sure.
Could this destabilize those regions even more? Make it harder to deal with the root causes of the cartel problem, like poverty and corruption?
It's all connected, isn't it?
It's complicated. Okay, now let's circle back to the DOGE department. That whole plan to, like, modernize the government's tech.
The tech SWAT teams.
Yeah, that's a tough job, right? We were a bit skeptical, I think. What do you think? Will it actually work, or is it just going to create more bureaucracy?
Well, a few things need to happen for it to be successful.
Like what?
Well, first, they need strong leadership.
Hmm.
Someone who can actually get things done in the government, which, let's face it, is not always easy.
Right.
And they'll need money, lots of it. Because updating those old systems, it's not cheap.
And they need to be clear about what they're actually trying to achieve. Like, what does modernization even mean in this context?
Exactly. What are the goals? How will they measure progress? And, maybe most importantly, they need the other agencies to cooperate. If those DOGE teams come in like they're taking over, well, it's not going to go well.
And what about those DOGE teams? Are they going to be helpful or just create more problems?
It's a risk, for sure. It all comes down to communication and collaboration, really.
Hmm.
If those teams can build trust and work with the people who are already there, then maybe they have a chance.
Okay, last one. And this is a big one. Let's talk about the invasion proclamation again.
The one at the border.
We talked about how it could change immigration law completely, maybe lead to mass deportations.
Like a much tougher approach to the border.
But we can't forget about the people who are actually affected by this.
The human cost.
What happens to the people who are fleeing violence trying to find safety?
The asylum seekers.
What about them? What does this say about us, about our values?
That's a really important question. And I think it gets to the heart of who we are as a country. By saying there's an invasion and using these emergency powers, it's like we're shutting the door on people who need help.
Turning our backs on them.
It's a big shift from how we've seen ourselves in the past. Like a place that welcomes people fleeing bad situations.
A place of refuge.
Right. And it sends a message to the rest of the world, a message that maybe we're more concerned with security than with helping people.
That's pretty profound. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive. Complex issues, lots of different perspectives. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
Any final thoughts for our listeners, as they try to make sense of all this?
Well, I'd say stay informed, keep asking questions, don't just take things at face value.
Do your own research.
Exactly. And remember, these executive actions, they're just the start. We need to see how they're put into practice, how they're challenged in court, how they affect people's lives.
It's an ongoing story.
And most importantly, stay engaged. Stay hopeful. We all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Well said. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a fascinating and, a little bit overwhelming look at how this new administration is using its power. But we'll be back soon to explore more of the issues that matter most to you. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.